All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Stephen Terry's in for dedicating over Shimon Joshua this month in memory of Steve's father, Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim, Leah's soul as a schus refuah shlema for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and the schus refuah shlema for all of those wounded in Eretz Yisrael. Yonasan and Rachel Wolf for a complete and lasting refuah for Rafal Yitzchak Baruch Ben Esther, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski in the schus refuah shlema for Zechariah Dov Ben Parol Shira, Azriel and Iris Miller in the schus of the holy soldiers of the IDF, and the merit of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Our week of learning sponsors, Robert Emas, in honor of the yahrzeit of his mother, Rus Bas Sarah, and appreciation of the entire Daf Yomi shir. And our week of learning sponsor, anonymous sponsor, in honor of Yoni Frager's birthday. We're going to start saying that in unison in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Yoni, happy birthday, Yoni. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Alan Wiseman. I remember Alan Wiseman. He has not, Baruch Hashem, is still in Eretz Yisrael for the celebration in honor of the wedding of his grandson, Zechariah, to Brachi Brisk tonight in Bnei Brak. Mazel Tov, the young couple in Mirz Hashem should be gebenched and should be zocha to build the Bayis Neman Bi Yisrael ad 120 shanim tovos. Again, we have Alan on Zoom today, Baruch Hashem, and it's wonderful to see you, Alan. We look forward to Mirz Hashem Halavai to joining you in Eretz Yisrael. All right, with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Ayin Gimel 73, and we are picking up on Ayin Beis and Beis 72b. So if you remember, again, we left off yesterday Tan Rabbanan, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. So remember, again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we introduced the new sheet, the new position of the Chachamim yesterday, and the Chachamim hold that halacha l'maisa kol aratzos becheskes kashras hein omdos. Remember, again, up until now we've been focusing with the model of Rabbi Meir, and the model of Rabbi Meir is that halacha l'maisa, you have Bavel, which is highest genealogical purity. Underneath Bavel you have Eretz Yisrael, and then underneath Eretz Yisrael you have all other lands. Chachamim say no. There's a cheskes kashrus. People have a cheskes kashrus. People have a general presumption of genealogical fitness and purity, unless you know otherwise. So the Gemara goes right to turn Rabbanon. Mamziri unesinik tehorim la'asad lavo. This is Rabbi Yossi. Both an incredible Gemara. Rabbi Yossi says mamzirim and nesinim will be purified in the Messianic era. Now, Rabbi Yossi say there's a little bit of a machlokes exactly what Rabbi Yossi is saying over here. Is he saying that even known mamzirim and known nesinim, like when Eliyahu Hanavi comes, it's like genealogical amnesty? You know, whatever you are, like we're wiping the slate clean. Obviously, doesn't apply to Kohanim, Levim. You know, if you're a Kohen, you're a Levi, you're still going to be that when Mashiach comes. But the idea is, if you have some type of genealogical blemish, when Mashiach comes, he goes ahead and he wipes the slate clean. Or the other possibility is that it's referring to those who are mamzerim and nesimim, but have kind of blended into general society. So when Mashiach comes, ultimately, again, their slate is wiped clean. Rabbi Meir says, Ein Tohorim. No, not true. Not true. Genealogical issues are genealogical issues. Mashiach could do a lot, but lamaisa at the end of the day, those still remain. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, "V'alo kvar ne'emar v'zarakte aleichem ma'im torm utahartem." But the pasuk says, referring to the Messianic era, I will sprinkle upon you pure waters, and you will become purified. Does that not mean that Mashiach has the ability to purify everyone from everything, including genealogical issues? Amar Rabbi Meir, Kishu Omer Mikol Tumo Seichem Umikol Gilu Lechem V'Lo Min Hamamzerus. So to which Rabbi Meir will respond, no. Because that means we're going to be purified from our tumah. In other words, from our iniquity, from our averas, that's a reference to tshuva, a cleansing of the spiritual slate. But lamaisa, not from mamzerus, not from genealogical issues. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kishu Omer Etar Eschem. When the pasuk says again, I shall purify you, Havi Omer Af Mea Mamzerus. Does that not mean even from mamzerus? So we'll say, so fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir. Is there a cleansing of mamzerus in the Messianic era? Bishlam Rabbi Meir Hainu Dichsev Vayeshev Mamzer Ba'ashdod. So let's listen to this. According to Rabbi Meir, who holds that Mashiach does not go ahead and cleanse the slate from mamzerus. So Rabbi say, so the pasuk of Vayashav mamzer ba'ashdod, pasuk in Zechariah, referring to the Messianic era as well. So it says there will be a mamzer in Ashdod, which clearly indicates that even in the Messianic era, there's mamzerus. There's mamzerus. El Rabbi Yossi, my Vayashav mamzer ba'ashdod. But according to Rabbi Meir, what do you do with that pasuk? What do you do with that pasuk? Rabbi Meir, who says that there's no mamzerus. I'm sorry, just the opposite. Rabbi Yossi, my Vashamazra Ashdod. What does Rabbi Yossi do at that pasuk? Kidmetagim Rabbi Yosef, as Rabbi Yosef explains it, Yasfun Beis Yisrael l'rachtzan ba'ar ehon dahavudamu ba l'nuchron. Both say the way Rabbi Meir, the way Rabbi Yossi understands that pasuk is as follows: Vayashav mamzer ba'ashdod. That ultimately, again, he who was once treated as a mamzer. In other words, we'll say the mamzer, to a certain degree, is a little bit of an outcast, right? Because he can't marry into the general pool. So the way Rabbi Meir, the way Rabbi Yossi understands the pasuk is that he who used to be treated like a mamzer, i.e. Klal Yisrael, who used to be relegated to the periphery, ultimately, again, now resides in Ashdod. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Name Shmuel, halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, namely that mamzerim, nesinim, are tahar in the Messianic era." Rabbi Yosef, Ilav Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi, hava ase Elio, mafik minin savrani kolarin. And Rabbi Yossi, so listen to this. So Rabbi Yehuda says. Right, Rabbi Yehuda says, had it not been, so Rav Yosef says, had Rabbi Yehuda not said that halachas like Rabbi Yossi, that Mashiach purifies mamzerim, when Mashiach comes, he would have been leading out groups and groups of genealogically impure people. In other words, we're both saying, essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this: if we don't subscribe to this idea of Rabbi Yossi, namely that Mashiach purifies the mamzerim, it's trouble. It's trouble. This is the best thing for Klal Yisrael that could happen. When Mashiach comes, the genealogical kind of table is reset. Otherwise, Mashiach would be leading out throngs of genealogically unfit people. Okay, so that's the end of that. How do we paskin? I don't know. We'll have to see. How Halavai will be zocheh me'eretz Hashem. Amongst the many interesting things that we hope to observe when Mashiach comes, we'll have to see what exactly will happen with those who have these genealogical blemishes. Will they be cleansed, right, and kind of like the genealogical table reset? Or at the end of the day, do their genealogical blemishes still remain? To be determined in Meretz Hashem B'Karav. Says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, Ger no se mamzeres. Did Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that a ger, a convert, has the right to marry a mamzeres. Right? We'll see exactly why that is. We'll say, by the way, the same thing would apply that a mamzer can marry a giores. They're just phrasing it. Remember, again, these things work. Well, they don't always work in both ways, but this one happens. And the idea over here is that a mamzer is permitted to marry a ger, right? Whether ultimately, again, the mamzer is the man or the mamzer is the woman, right? They're permitted to marry a ger. Okay, those Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ger lo yisim mamzer. So he says, no, absolutely not true. A ger cannot marry a mamzeres. So the Gemara says, Echad ger, echad evan meshucher b'chalol, mutarim b'kohanes. But whether a ger or an evan meshucher, an emancipated slave, or a chalol are permitted to marry a kohanes. Remember again, a kohanes is a bas kohen. Okay, so let's analyze this. My time is Rabbi Yossi. So let's start first with the idea about a ger marrying a mamzeres. Why does Rabbi Yossi hold that is permitted? So Rabbi Yossi says like this: Chamisha kehile ksive. Now both say, remember, when it comes to a mamzer, the operative pasuk is lo yovo mamzer b'kal Hashem. A mamzer cannot enter into the assembly of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean, that a mamzer can't enter into the assembly of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What that means is that a mamzer is not permitted to marry into the general Jewish pool. But the way the Torah phrases it is Kahal Hashem, the assembly of God. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Rabbi Yossi says, the Torah says Kal 5 times. 5 times. In fact, again, if you take a look If you take a look at the last Rashi, Rashi goes through all of them. They're not all by mamzer. One of them is by mamzer, and then others are by the other individuals who cannot marry into the general assembly of Klal Yisrael. So watch this. So Chamisha Kal Iksivi says Kal 5 times. Top of Ayin Gimel 73a. So Chad LeKohanim. So one is to tell you that mamzerim can't marry Kohanim. V'Chad LeViim. One is to say that mamzer can't marry a Levi. V'Chad LeYisraelim. One is to teach me ultimately that I can't marry Yisraelim. V'Chad Lemishri mamzer b'shtuki. One is to permit ultimately again the mamzer to marry a shtuki. Remember again, I'm going to say who's the shtuki? The shtuki is the person who knows his mother but doesn't know his father. V'chad lemishri shtuki b'Yisrael. And one is to permit a general Yisrael to marry a shtuki as well. Okay, so we'll say what's the logic over here? So bottom line, why is it that Rabbi Yossi allows the marriage between a ger and a mamzer? Very simply, kal gerim lo ikri kal. I will say gerim are not there's no kal Yisrael essentially means those who are born Jewish. That's the technical legal definition. Someone who converted is just technically not under that umbrella of Kal. I will say just to be clear. So remember again, going back, we know how much the Torah loves the ger, right? How much Chash Baruch Hu loves the ger. That's why again, as we saw in Tosas, right? Kashim gerim Yisrael means we are so obligated to treat the ger with so much sensitivity that no one could ever live up to this expectation. So just to be clear, when we say that Kal gerim is not Kal, we're not Chas Hashem excluding the ger from the assembly of Klal Yisrael. This is a technical issue. When the Torah says Lo Yavo Mamzer Bekahal Hashem, Rabbi Yossi ultimately says Kahal means those who are born Jewish. It doesn't mean those who convert. As such, the ger is permitted to go ahead and marry, or the mamzer is permitted to marry the ger. Rabbi Huda disagrees. What does Rabbi Huda say? Rabbi Huda, Kohanim u'Leviim mechad kal nafki. Rabbi Huda says, Kohanim and Leviim I learned that from one kal. So ayeser le kal gerim. He has one kal left over, so to speak, and with that, he understands that the gerim are called a kahal. If gerim are called a kahal, then what? Then a mamzer is not permitted to go ahead and marry a ger. So I will say, some first explanation the Gemara understands over here is machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda. Is a mamzer permitted to marry a ger? Fundamentally rooted in whether or not the gerim are called a kahal or not. According to Rabbi Yossi, they are not. Therefore, again, a mamzer can marry them. According to Rabbi Huda, they are, and therefore a mamzer can't marry them. Good. People say the other possibility is hachanami trei kali ninu. So we'll say the other possibility is no. We use both kals. So mamzer b'shtuki, ushtuki b'yisrael mechad kal nafka. But you could condense or consolidate some of the limudim, some of the drushes. And ultimately, again, mamzer marrying a shtuki and a shtuki marrying a Yisrael, you can learn out from one kal. Okay? Lo yavo mamzer bekal Hashem. So Baruch said, furthermore, again, there's another interpretation. When it says a mamzer cannot marry into the kal Hashem, mamzer vaday hu de lo yavo, ha mamzer safek yavo. Now Baruch say, this is very important. The prohibition of a mamzer to marry into Kal Hashem, to marry into the General Assembly, is only a mamzer vaday. Mamzer vaday. There is no such thing in halacha as a suffix mamzer. Very interesting, right? You would have thought a suffix mamzer, suffix da'oraisa l'chumra. Doubt in biblical law, we resolve it stringently. There's no such thing as suffix mamzer in halacha. So the Torah says, "Yavo mamzer b'Kal Hashem." Mamzer means mamzer vaday. If you're not a mamzer vaday, then what are you? Regular guy, right? Regular guy. So halacha l'maisa only applies mamzer vaday. But kal vaday hu d'lo yavo. Furthermore, the mamzer can't marry into the kal vaday. But who can he marry? Ha b'kal safek yavo. But he can marry into the kal safek. Who's the kal safek? That's the shtuki, that's the asufi, right? These are the individuals, we'll talk about them in just a little bit, whose genealogy is not totally known. So the other possibility is, Hani Navi Trei Kahalininu. No, these also are considered to be two distinct kals. But time with Rabbi Huda Mihacha. So Rabbi Huda, who says that a ger cannot marry a mamzer, he learns out from the following. Hakal chuka achos lochem v'la ger. V'lager hagar. So that's Rabbi Yehuda ultimately again derives his drushel. Rabbi Yossi chuka achos hifsika inyan. He understands that the phrase chuka achos ultimately again divides the subject matter. Echad ger ve'echad eved mishur. So okay, so that's our first part over here. That halacha l'maisa fundamental machlokes. Can a ger marry a mamzeres or not? Rabbi Yehuda is saying no. Rabbi Yossi is saying yes. Rabbi Yossi, at the end of the day, we're going to see the fundamental machlokes is really rooted in the first interpretation. Do we call kal gerim a kal or not? Is the community of gerim called a kahal? Called a kahal. So again, if it is, then a mamzer cannot marry a ger. If it's not, then a mamzer can marry a ger. That's the fundamental halacha. Just hold on to it, Emir Hashem. We'll come back to the halacha in just a moment. Shabbos says, so let's go weiter. So first of all, let me just tell you, we do paskin that a ger is permitted to marry a mamzeres, or a mamzer a giores. Now, remember, the marriage is permitted, but what doesn't that marriage prevent? What doesn't it prevent? The transmission of mamzeros. So in other words, they are permitted to marry, right? So a ger is permitted to marry mamzeres, mamzer is permitted to marry giores, but remember, their offspring will be a mamzer. So the marriage is permitted, but ultimately, again, no different, by the way, than if two mamzerim marry each other, permitted marriage, but again, the mamzerus is still transmitted, right? We saw both say, the only way to stop the transmission of mamzerus, remember again, the only way to stop the transition of mamzerus? Steal, be sold into servitude, right? Go ahead and marry a shivcha, have kids with her, right? She could be freed afterwards, and then ultimately, again, those kids are not mamzerim, right? So that's the one way you could stop the transmission of mamzerus. Otherwise, again, even in permitted marriage, the genealogical blemish is still passed down. Let's go weiter. Remember again, second thing the Brisa spoke about was a ger, convert. Eved Meshuchrar, emancipated slave, who is effectively a convert as well. Chalal, who's a chalal? Offspring of a forbidden Kohanic union. For example, Cohen goes ahead and marries a grusha, marries a divorcee. They have a child, that kid is a chalal. All of these men, mutar b'kohanes, are permitted to marry a bas Cohen. Bas Kohen, totally permitted. So the Gemara says, Mesele the Rav, Damar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Lo Husru Ksheros Li Nasi Lepsulim. The Gemara says this supports Rav. Rav holds that halacha l'maisa, women who are ksheros don't have a problem. It's not a problem for them to marry men who are genealogically blemished. Not a problem. So Mar says, Darash Rabbi Zera ben Mechuza, ger mutar b'mamzer. So I said, okay, so now let's go back for just a second. Great story here. So Rabbi Zera darshan in Mechuza that a ger is permitted to marry a mamzeres. Okay, what happened? What was the response? Rigamuhu kuli alma be'esragaihu. Everyone pelted him with their estrogim. So it must have been Sukkah's time. Right? And ultimately, again, they pelted him. Now, Rabbi, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says 4 lines off from where Rashi gets wide. Regamu kule alma shahayu sham gerim harbe v'hok shalahem shamar kal gerim lo ikre kal. Shabbos say they were offended. Apparently, again, there were a lot of gerim in Mechuzah. Now, Avi says, we saw before, what's the logic of saying that a ger is permitted to marry a mamzer? What's the logic? The logic is that gerim are not called kahal Yisrael. Kal Yisrael. So we'll say, if you just say that without explaining that it's not chas v'shalom, it's not an expression of a lack of love, but rather it's just a technical, legal, mechanistic term, it's offensive. So they got offended. What did they do when they got offended? They pelted him. They pelted Rabbi Zera. Teresrogim. Amar Rava says, Mi ika de darash milsekiha beduchta de shrichi giri. So what says Grebel? So Rava says, Rabbi Zera, come on, man. Right? It's not an exact quote, but come on. Right? A little sensitivity. Right? You have to understand who your audience is. You have to understand who you're talking to. If you're there's a way to give over this halacha, but just understand that there are many gerim in the audience, and you have to be sensitive about how you're giving it over. So Darash Rav Mechuzah, so it says this. So Rava also gave a shir Mechuzah, and what did he say? Ger muter b'kohanes. he said that a ger is permitted to marry a kohenes, right? A male ger is permitted to marry a bas kohen. So ta'anu b'shiroi, they showered him with silk. So meaning they were very happy, very appreciative. Why? Because it was he built. It was at the end of the day, people just want to feel valued. People want to feel valued. So ultimately, again, when Rabbi Zera comes in and says a ger can marry a mamzeres, they just felt unappreciated. They felt marginalized, peripheralized, and they responded, okay, we're not. To be clear, we're not condoning the response. In general, don't pelt anyone with your esrog. Right, but lamaisa, it's understandable. They were offended. Rava comes along and says you can marry Kohanes. They felt wonderful. Now watch this. Hadadarshlu ger mutar. Then afterwards, Rava said, by the way, a ger is permitted to marry mamzeres. Amrulei avsidita lekamaisa. They said to Rava, you totally undone the good that you did before. In other words, you made us feel so good. We're saying that a ger can marry kohanes, and then I both say, and now what happens? You totally undid that by telling us that a ger can marry mizrach. So I both say, what's interesting? When Rava went ahead and said the same halacha, what didn't they do? Pelt them with the esrogim. Why not? Because there was a relationship, because there was an understanding. You see, I will say, when you establish relationship with people, you're able to sometimes have difficult conversations. When there's no relationship and there's no feeling of being valued, then when you say something offensive, then at the end of the day, by definition, it hurts and it often evokes a very visceral and negative relationship. Masha'en kain, when there is relationship, right? When there's relationship. So here, what did Rava do? Rava, very smart. Rava established relationship. How do you establish relationship? In a very basic way. He said a ger can marry a kohenes. What did he establish through that statement? What did he establish? You're valued. You're important. Okay, now you're valued, you're important. By the way, a ger can marry mamzer. It's like, oh, right? Like, right? You're just like, but at least there's no estrogim flying. Why? Because since a Rava established relationship, we could say the difficult things. It doesn't mean it's not going to sting. It doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. But lamaisa, there's a basis, right? There's a foundation in order to be able to have this conversation. Incredible. So the Gemara said, Amalahu. So Rabbi said, no, you don't know what I did for you. The Tavaluchu Avdi, I actually did you a favor, Mamzerim, right? People of Mechuzah, right? Ibay mehachanasiv. We'll say the Mamzer actually, says Rava, is in a very unique spot, right? In a very unique spot. That sorry, not the Mamzer, the Ger is in a very unique spot. How so? If the Ger wants to marry, right, a Kohenes, the Ger has the ability to do so. If a Ger wants to go ahead and marry the Mamzeres, the Ger has the ability to do so. We'll say, no one really could move so fluidly within the different shades of Klal Yisrael as the Mamzer. I will say, if you think about it, there's a profound like hashkafic piece in this also. So before I get to so Rava was saying, understand what I just did for you. You can go to either extreme. You can marry the Kohanes or you can marry the Mamzer. No one else in Klal Yisrael has that marital fluidity or that marital flexibility like you, Gerim, do. So let's say, if you think about it, even from a hashkafic level, let's say, what is incredible about the Ger? Right? Think about this in just a moment. What does the Ger teach us in the most dramatic and overwhelming way? That change is possible. That change is possible, right? Who is the Ger? The Ger takes a personality that looks like X and just totally, fundamentally changes it into something dramatically different. The Ger is the most evolutionary species that exists within the universe, right? The Ger says you can be born one way, live one way, and then just decide that you want to be someone fundamentally different, and you could do it. So perhaps again that's even manifest in halacha as well, that the ger is kind of able to go to different pockets in Klal Yisrael and be able to fit in. So the ger can marry the mamzer, the ger can marry the kohanes, and it works. Why? Because ultimately, again, when you establish within yourself that fluidity of personality, right, that fluidity of identity, that you could go ahead and literally change yourself so profoundly and fundamentally and cathartically, that allows you to travel in different pockets of Klal Yisrael as well. Something to be learned. Maybe that's another pshat ultimately again in Kasha Gerim Yisrael. But say, you know why it's Kasha? You know why Gerim are so difficult for Klal Yisrael? Because the Ger is a little bit of an indictment for the rest of us. Why? Because the rest of us, we like to speak about change. But change is one of those things where we talk about it, and then inside, right? I said, I'm going to change, and then what's the voice inside of me? I'm not changing anything. Right, this is it. This is it, right? This is it. I could, maybe make some cosmetic stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm not changing. And I both say this is where Gerim are difficult for us. Why? Because the Ger comes along, and what does the Ger show the world? The Ger shows the world that not only is change possible, but dramatic change is possible. And the Ger did it, and he's living a different life. And meanwhile, I can't seem to get out of my own way. Perhaps that's just another dimension in Kashim Gerim Yisrael. In any event, so Rava goes ahead and says to the people, "Mechuzah, I'm doing you a favor." Rava say, "What's the halacha?" Okay, I gave it to you a little bit early. Ger mutar b'kohanes or mutar b'mamzeres. So Rava said, at the end of the day, the halacha is that a ger is permitted to marry kohanes or bas kohen, and he is permitted to marry mamzeres. Mutar bekohanes, he's permitted to marry the kohanes. Lo husaru ksheros li nasi the psulim. Because I will say again, at the end of the day, a bas kohen is not prohibited from marrying someone who is genealogically blemished. And ultimately, again, mutar mamzeres Rabbi Yossi, and he's permitted to marry mamzeres like Rabbi Yossi, namely that kal gerim lo ikri kal. So we'll say, and that indeed is the halacha. So again, the ger being very unique can marry the mamzeres, can marry the kohanes. Incredible. So elu in shtuki. So we'll say now we're going to go through the rest of the list of the genealogical issues. So remember again, next, who do we have? Shtuki. So we'll say, who's the shtuki? Shtuki is the individual ultimately again who knows his mother, but does not know his father. So remember again, I will say, when it came to the shtuki, halacha l'maisa again, so fine. Okay, shtuki v'asufi kulam mutar level zebazeh. So I will say the shtukim and the asufim, mamzer, nesini, all of those individuals are permitted to marry into each other. So Amar Rava, Dvar Torah, shtuki kasher. So Rava says midaraisa, a shtuki is genealogically fit. So my time, what's the reason for that? So I'll say, now remember again, the shtuki, we don't know who the father is, we know who the mother is. Rov ksherem esla, umir psulim esla. Because I will say, remember again, his mother obviously again had relations with a man, right? So in other words, the shtuki has a father. So if you look at the majority of men in the world with whom she could have had relations, they are ksherim. There be people there who are genealogically fit. There is some miyut, but I will say, there's also another possibility that's what? What's the other possibility? That who's the shtuki's father? A mamzer, right? But that's a miyut, right? The majority of the world are not mamzerim, right? So the majority of the world are ksherim. It's a good way to also remember to always look at humanity, right? The majority of the world are ksherim, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but that is the truth. The majority of the world are ksherim. The minority are mamzerim. The Gemara says, so therefore again, umil psul esla, v'azli inhu legabal. So ultimately again, if ultimately again the man came to have relations with the woman, then called the parish meruba parish. Then of course we have a principle that ultimately again, whatever the man is coming from the rove. So the Gemara says, my armor. So what do you have to be concerned about? Maybe ultimately again she's going to the man to have relations. Let me just illustrate this to you quickly. We've seen this concept before. If you have 9 stores that sell kosher meat and 1 store that sells non-kosher meat, so Rabbi say you find a piece of meat in the street. What's the halacha? Kosher. Why? Called the parish miruba parish, because we assume that whatever separated, so to speak, from the stores came from the majority, it's kosher. What if you go into a store to buy a piece of meat and you don't remember, did you go into the kosher store or the non-kosher store? So we'll say that's the difference. That's kol kavua. If you go to the place of kvios, a fixed place, then that's kemechza mechza. Ultimately, again, that creates it like a 50-50 situation, in which case the piece of meat would be aser. Again, we're not getting into the technicalities over here of that, or the logic behind that. That's just the halacha. So the Gemara says like this: if the man came to her the mother of the shtuki, to have relations, then we say called the parash. Whoever comes, right? Whoever comes to her comes from the rove. The rove of people ultimately again are ksherim. What do you have to be concerned about? Maybe she went to the man to have relations. Then that's a case of kol kavua. She went to the fixed place, so to speak. Mechzal mechzal. Then it's a 50-50 situation. Maybe he's a mamzer, maybe he's a apostle, maybe he's not. So the Gemara says maybe that's your concern. To which the Gemara says, "Vatorah Amra lo yavo mamzer vadehu de lo yavo ha mamzer safek yavo." So Rabbi said this is very important. This is good what we saw before. So it's a good kasha. So why isn't the shtuki at least a safek mamzer? Right? Rabbi said, remember again, we don't know who the shtuki's father is. That's the ochab. So why isn't he at least a safek mamzer? And Rabbi said, what's the answer to that? What's the answer? There is no such thing as safek mamzer. Right? Either you're a mamzer or you're not a mamzer. Right? In halacha, there's no category of safek mamzer. Lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem means you're only a mamzer if you are a vadai mamzer. Sad most, the shtuki is a safek mamzer, and there's no such thing as safek mamzer in halacha. Furthermore, again, b'kal vadai hu de lo yavo, and furthermore, again, just this has nothing to do with our Gemara. It's just all part of the same drasha. The mamzer cannot come into the kal vadai, right? But habekal safek yavo. But ultimately, again, he can come into the kal safek. Okay, umatam amru shtuki pasal. So Rabbi say if that's the case, so why is the shtuki genealogically blemished? In other words, if at the end of the day, at most what you've got with the shtuki is, and most what you've got with him is a safek mamzer. But there's no such thing as safek mamzer. So then why is he considered to be genealogically blemished? Listen to this. So gzeira shema yisa achos some aviv. Interesting. We'll say, what are we concerned about? Because we don't know who the shtuki's father is, what do we have to be concerned about? That maybe when he goes and he meets a nice young lady, maybe her father is his father. We don't know. So if that's the case, shtuki is lo yisa, then one shtuki, right, a male shtuki shouldn't be able to marry a female shtukis. Right? Why? Maybe they have the same father. So the Gemara says, Shema Yisach Chosome Aviv. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Kol Kihani Mizana Va'azli Bashtukis. I don't understand. That we assume that what? That one guy decided that his life mission is to become the father of Shtukim? Right? Again, everybody needs a hobby, right? So right? That's it, right? This is it, right? This we assume like it's the same guy who's just impregnating women all over the place. Like is that like a reasonable concern? To which the Gemara says, Elo. Kol Gianam Mizana Va'azli Bashtukis Lo Yisa Shema Achos Aviv Me'aviv Shema Yisa Achos Me'aviv Ella Lo Shchicha. Right? They both said no. A shtuki can marry a shtukis. Why? Because they both said the statistical probability that they have the same father is totally remote. Hachanami Lo Shchicha. Well, if you're going to say that by a shtukis, they both say then you should say that by anyone. In other words, what is the probability that when the shtuki meets a regular Jewish girl that they have the same father? They have the same father. To which it's not shchiach. Ella maila asabi yochsin. You're right. I will say at the end of the day, the Gemara says the reason why a shtuki is considered to be genealogically blemished, I will say, is just in order to uphold a higher standard by yichus. In other words, this goes back to our previous discussion, which is that halacha l'maisa, maintaining some semblance of genealogical continuity, or I shouldn't say a heightened genealogical, is necessary for the existential continuity of Klal Yisrael. Right? So therefore, again, Chazal said is, if you don't know who your father is, that creates a genealogical issue. It can limit the people you can marry. Why? It's just an extra stringency to go ahead and uphold genealogical purity. That's all. Right? A sense of genealogical continuity. I shouldn't call it genealogical continuity. Okay, but Rava says similarly again, Asufi. Tvar Torah Asufi kasher. We'll say, who's the Asufi? The Asufi is, we don't know either of the parents, right? The Asufi is a child who is abandoned and then raised by other parents. Right? An adopted child who does not know his genealogical parents. So Rava says, Midaraisa, an Asufi is totally kosher. My time, I will say, what's the logic? Eishes ishba baila tola. So I will say, because remember again, why? So I will say, here's what's interesting: is the Gemara is trying to understand why does someone abandon a child? Why does someone abandon the child? So we'll say, obviously, that's a complex question on a variety of levels. We're going to get into this a little bit. I would say, so you think to yourself, maybe it's a woman who committed adultery and became pregnant through her adulterer. That can't be it, because it was that she could just as easily attribute that baby to her husband. Right? She's married. So she could just as easily say that she's pregnant from her husband. Right? So Ma'ika, what are you worried about? Ma'ika miut arusos umiut shahalach bailam medinas hayam. So I will say, what you do have over here, is that halacha l'maisa, either a woman who's in arusa, in which case if she becomes pregnant, again, that's a bit of an issue because she's not yet living with her husband, or a woman whose husband is overseas. And therefore, again, if she becomes pregnant, obviously it's not from her husband. So Kevan deika pnuya veika nami demachmas ravon have palga. But I will say, okay, so you have those two women. Now remember again, those children will be mamzerim. So essentially what we're trying to figure out is, when you find an asufi, why don't we assume that kid is a mamzer? Right? So I will say, so on one hand, maybe there is grounds to say he's a mamzer, because maybe his mother was an arusa, with erusin to someone else, became pregnant from another man, and abandoned the child who's a mamzer. Or maybe it's a married woman whose husband is overseas, she committed adultery, she gives up the baby, also mamzer. But there are other cases. What are the other cases? The other cases is penuya. You could have a girl who just conceived out of wedlock, and again doesn't want to raise the child, and therefore abandons him, chas v'shalom. Or, right, famine, years of famine, a couple, maybe just a totally legitimate couple, feels they cannot go ahead and support this child, again, abandons the child. So therefore, have palga upalga. So what you see over here is that when you find this asufi, when you find this child in the shuk, in the marketplace, abandoned, there's competing narratives. Could the child be a mamzer? Is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. But there's also other possible explanations over here. So we'll say, so therefore again, what does that make it? At most? Safek mamzer. And what's the halacha by Safek mamzer? What's the halacha by Safek mamzer? V'atorah omra lo yovo mamzer b'kal Hashem, mamzer vadei hu d'lo yovo, ha mamzer Safek yovo. B'kal vadei hu d'lo yovo, ha b'kal Safek yovo. So what you see over here is what Rav is saying, is that really me'ikar adin, an asufi is totally and wholly genealogically kosher. Right? Why? Because the most you have when it comes to an asufi is safek mamzer. But again, that's not really a problem, because there's no such thing in halacha as safek mamzer. So what's the issue? So what is the issue by asufi? And why does the asufi have some level of genealogical issues? To which the Gemara says, Matam amru asufi pasol, shema yisa achoso me'aviv. They will say, what are we concerned about? We're concerned that maybe the asufi will ultimately marry his paternal sister. In other words, I will say, the asufi doesn't know his father, so maybe one day he's going to meet a nice young lady, and it turns out they have the same father. Ella me'ata asufi asufas la'yisa, shema yisa achoso b'me ava b'me imo. I will say, but one second, I'll tell you even better. If that's the case, the asufi shouldn't really be able to marry anyone, because I will say, why? At least the shtuki, right? He at least knows what? Who his mother is, right? So the shtuki at least knows his mother. So okay, so the asufi doesn't know either parent. So even one asufi shouldn't be able to marry another asufi. Why? Because maybe he meets someone else. Maybe they literally have the same parents. To which the Gemara says, that doesn't make sense. Kohani shadi va'azli, right? The Gemara says, Kohani shadi asufi. So again, do we assume that once people abandon one child, they keep on abandoning other children? So the Gemara says, Bas asufi lo yisa, shama yisa choso, elo lo shchiach. Rather, Rabbi say, what you have to say is, come on, what's the probability that when an asufi meets an asufis, that they have the same parents? That's not shchiach, right? That doesn't make sense. Hachanami lo shchiach. So I can make that same argument by any case. Whenever he meets someone, what's the statistical probability that they share the same parent? Ella Maila Asabiyuchsin. Shabbos, you see, it's the same answer, both by the shtuki and by the asufi. Shabbos, let's kind of bring this together over here. Saloch Alamais, here's what we have. The shtuki, he knows his mother, doesn't know his father. Asufi doesn't know either parent. Rava tells us that Midda Oraisa, these individuals are 100% genealogically fit. Right? What's the concern? Because we will say at most, what's the concern both by the shtuki and the asufi? What's the concern? Safek mamzer. And again, what do we say by Safek mamzer? No such thing as Safek mamzer. Lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, only mamzer vadai, not a mamzer Safek. So therefore, again, there's no mamzerus. Ultimately, again, when it comes to the shtuki or the asufi. So therefore, Rabbi say, so what's the issue? So then why are they considered genealogically blemished? Maila asul biyochsim. Essentially, it's a chumrah by genealogy. But in genealogy, we're just very machmir, right? Again, in order to maintain some level of genealogical continuity and purity, and therefore, again, because the paternity of these individuals is not 100% known, therefore, again, they are relegated to a different status. Again, I will say, it's not discriminatory, and it's not, again, I will say, and it's not elitist. It's, again, in order, it was what I was talking about by conversions as well, right? You have to have a system. If you don't have a system and you don't strive for genealogical fitness, for some semblance of order, you see this with other streams in Judaism that are not careful, that are not necessarily careful with maintaining some semblance. Even though it could start with the most beautiful of intentions and desires for inclusiveness, what it does is just fundamentally the fabric unravels. The fabric unravels until at a certain point you just don't have a sense of national identity. You don't know who's in, who's not in, who's Jewish, who's not Jewish. So it sounds a little bit elitist, and it might even sound a little bit discriminatory, but that's not chas v'shalom it at all. It's just sometimes obviously you have to do certain things to ensure the existential continuity of the klal. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar I will say last line. So now I will say some interesting cases are about the Asufi. So remember, all of these cases, the Asufi is most fascinating because the Asufi is the abandoned child. Right? The Asufi is the abandoned child. So watch Amar Rava Barafuna. Matzah Mahol. We'll say, let's say you find an Asufi in the shuk. Right? You find an abandoned child in the shuk, bless you, and he's circumcised. He has a bris milah. Amud Beis. Ein bo mishum asufi. Ultimately, we'll say he's not an asufi. Now we'll say, what does that mean he's not an asufi? Now remember again, the asufi has certain limitations as to who he's allowed to marry, right? Because why? The whole issue of paternity and the whole issue of yichus is not worked out. Interestingly enough, if you find the baby circumcised, he's not an asufi. Why not? Well, he doesn't have the status of an asufi. Rashi says over here, Now, I will say, by the way, just so you should understand, what does it mean when we say, well, let's finish. Why isn't he an asufi? Look at Rashi. Top Rashi, Ayin Gimel Beis 73b. Di'i lav de kasher hu lo hava tarcha be'lemelbe. If the baby wasn't kosher, the parents would not have taken the time, or someone would not have taken the time to circumcise the child. In other words, here's what's interesting. The asufi, at the end of the day, has this suffix status. Right? Now again, not a mamzer, because there's no such thing as suffix mamzer, but a suffix status. Now let's understand, what is the ramification of being an asufi? Halakhic ramification. Really, at the end when we say you're an asufi, what does that mean? So practically what it means is, you're allowed to marry a mamzer. Right? That is what it means. Why? I say, the Rambam Paskins over here, the Rambam says, actually, let me hold on to this right now. Let's leave this for just a second before we get to the Rambam. So I will say, and scratch that one just about marrying a mamzer. We're not up to that yet. Leave that out right now. The idea is that being an asufi is a genealogical status, right? Which is going to limit, ultimately, in certain respects, who your marriage pool is. So the Gemara is pointing out over here that the concept of an asufi is we are always concerned about a suffix of genealogical unfitness. Unfitness, is that a word? Unfitness? Yeah. Genealogical blemish. What the Gemara points out over here is, if you see that the baby is looked after, that is indicative of the fact that someone cared enough to take care of the baby. If someone cared enough to take care of the baby, the Gemara understands to be actually a testament to genealogical fitness. Interestingly enough. So if the baby is found circumcised, that shows genealogical fitness. Mishalti hadmiya ein bo mishum asufi. We'll say, Rashi says, if the limbs are straightened out. So we'll say often what they would do is, after the baby was born, sometimes the limbs get a little bit destroyed. At least in Talmudic times, what they would do is, they would straighten out the limbs. It sounds like what they would do is, they would swaddle the baby tightly, like with the limbs extended, so as to straighten out the limbs. So if you see a baby swaddled like that, that means that what? Someone took the time to take care of this baby. Next. So the Gemara says, Shayif Mishcha, you find the baby smeared with oil. Mala Kuchla, or ultimately, again, with some eye makeup. Apparently, again, some people pierce the ears of little girls, other people put some eye makeup, right? So apparently, if you put eye makeup, these are all demonstrative that someone took care of this baby. If someone took care of this baby, then Lamaisa, again, it means it's not an asufi. So the Gemara says, Rami Chumri, ultimately, again, if they tie like a little spice packet around the baby's neck, Tale Piska, or a little piece of paper like an amulet, Tale Kima, an actual amulet, not in writing, Ein bo mishum asufi. I will say in all of these cases, halacha l'maisa, the baby doesn't have the status of an asufi. Now, what's the logic? Take a look at Rashi. Ein bo mishum asufi, di pasal hava. See, I will say the assumption is that if the baby was genealogically unfit, lo hava metaknele hoil v'daita lahashlicha. Elamach. So I will say. So here's what's interesting. So if, in other words, if you the typical case of a shtuki essentially is an abandoned baby who's not cared for. That's the concern, that maybe this baby is genealogically unfit and it was cast away because of its genealogical unfitness. But if you go ahead and you find a baby who is cared for, who is looked after, again, in one of these aforementioned ways, then that is indicative that the baby comes actually from a kosher union, but was cast away for different reasons. What are the reasons? Or also what are the reasons? So most notably, finances. A family could not afford to take care of this baby. But what did they ensure happened? The baby was circumcised, the baby was looked after, the baby was wrapped up, was straightened out, was smeared with oil, whatever it is. It's very interesting. So if the baby is clearly looked after, that is indicative that it does not have the asufi status. Incredible. So Gemara gives other examples of this. Tali b'dikli, what if you find the baby's basket hanging on a palm tree? So if the basket is hanging low enough that an animal, a predatory animal, could get the baby, then that's an asufi. In other words, that's clear. And then the parent put, in other words, it will say, the idea is an asufi is when there's some element of disregard for the child, right? But so if the basket is hanging from the tree and a predatory animal could chas v'shalom get that means whoever put the baby there didn't care enough about the welfare of the child. Imlav, but if the basket is placed in a secure enough way that a predatory animal cannot get it, then ein bo mishum asufi. Zardasa, if the baby is placed on a sorb tree, smicha lamasa, if it's near the city, yesh bo mishum asufi, then it's an asufi. And if not, we'll say, remember, this goes back to Maseches Brachas. So whatever the reason, shadim are often found around the sorb tree that is close to the city. And apparently, like, everyone knew this. So if you place the baby on a sorb tree next to the city, you're placing the baby in mortal danger. That's indicative of an asufi. So again, I will say, the idea being, let's go some other examples. If someone leaves a baby in a shul that is next to the city, and people are found there, there's no issue of asufi there. I will say, why not? Why not? Because you know the baby is going to be found. But again, if let's say you leave the baby by a more remote shul, where people don't necessarily frequent as much, then Abba said there's an asufi issue. So Abba say again, you begin to see what's the pattern. If the baby is abandoned, but abandoned in a way which clearly indicates that either A, the baby is cared for, or B, the baby is placed in a situation where someone is going to definitely find the baby, that's not an asufi. That's not halachic asufi. So I will say, what drives the designation of asufi is that we are concerned that this child came from either an illegitimate or forbidden union. And the way that's often manifest is a lack of care or concern for chas v'shalom, the abandoned baby. But when the baby is clearly cared for, and the baby is clearly looked after, but abandoned nevertheless, that indicates that it's not a genealogical issue that's driving this, but rather there's some other issue, probably most notably a financial issue, that leads the parents to abandon the baby. Amar Meimar, Hai Peir de Sufli, Yesh Bo Mishum Asufi. So we'll say, what's Peir de Sufli? Rashi says over here, Rashi says, "Pered sofli nimtza bechafira hasui lahatil sham garine tamarim." So I'll say this was a pit in which they would discard date pits. a pit in which they would discard date pits. So if you find a baby in there, that baby is an asufi, right? Charifta dinara in ba mishum asufi, the channel by a river, where again a lot of people would be found in that area, no asufi. Pashri yesh ba mishum asufi. So as Pishra Rashi says, is makom shipua hanar idev shar shlagim, a place where like the snow from the mountaintops melts into it. That's ultimately again asufi. Sidi Rosh Hashanah. So again, different areas. Sidi Rosh Hashanah, if you find a baby on the sides of Rosh Hashanah, Ein ba mishum asufi. So let's remember again, what's the chap? Sidi Rosh Hashanah is it's public enough that what? Someone is going to find the baby, but not such dense pedestrian traffic that the baby is going to be trampled. On the other hand, Rosh Hashanah, yesh ba mishum asufi. But say, if you leave you find a baby in Rosh Hashanah, a baby abandoned in Rosh Hashanah, that is an asufi. Right? Both say, placing a baby in Rosh Hashanah is what? Placing the baby in mortal danger. So again, if there's such blatant disregard for the welfare of the baby, then ultimately that's indicative that it's an asufi. Rava says, "Ubishnei re'avon ein ba mishum asufi." Rava says, during years of famine, there is no status of asufi. Now I will say, what's the idea over here? What's the idea? During a famine, Rahman al-Islam, it was, I don't know, common, but it wasn't foreign for a person to abandon their child, to abandon a baby. They could not support the baby, they could not feed the baby. So therefore Rava says there's no din of asufi by a famine. So the Gemara says, Had Rava ahiyah. Which statement, which affirmation statement is Rava commenting on? If he means to say that during years of famine, even a baby abandoned in Rosh Hashanah is not an asufi, that can't be. The Gemara says, "Aidi dishnei ra'avon katlalei." So we'll say, I don't understand. The issue of leaving a baby in Rosh Hashanah, we'll say, is you're placing the baby in mortal danger. What does it matter if it's a famine or it's not a famine? Ella asidi Rosh Hashanah. Rather, must be talking about again leaving a baby on the sides of Rosh Hashanah. That doesn't make sense. My area shnei ra'avon afilu below shnei ra'avon. So we'll say by Siddur Hashanah, even if it's not a famine, we said that that's not nasufi. Ella ki itmar de Rava aha. Rather, Rabbi said, Rabbi was commenting on the following statement. Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yehuda Barzvidi Amarav, Kolzman Shebeshuk. Rabbi said, listen to this. Let's say you find a baby in the marketplace. As long as that baby is in the marketplace, Aviv v'imo ne'emanim alav. His parents are believed regarding it. Rabbi said, now what does this mean? So take a look at Rashi. Watch the following case. I'm walking in the marketplace. I find a baby in the marketplace, an asufi, right? I pick it up. Right after I pick it up, I just said, okay, Baruch Hu put this baby in my eye. That means I'm going to raise it as my own. What happens? Two people, man and woman, show up and say, just want you to know, that's our kid, right? Thank you for agreeing to raising him, right? That's our kid. So I'll say the halacha is, the parents are believed. The parents are believed. As long as the baby is still in the shuk, the parents are believed. So the Gemara said, Nasaf min hashuk, once the baby is removed from the marketplace, then what? Ein ne'emanin alav. They are no longer believed regarding the baby. My time, what's the reason? Amarava, hoil v'yatsa alav, shem asufi. So I will say why? Because essentially when the baby is still in the marketplace, the baby doesn't yet have the identity of asufi. Once the baby is removed from the marketplace, so therefore before it has the concretized identity of asufi, the parents are believed to come along and say, that's our kid, he's kosher. Fine. Once he's collected from the marketplace, once he moved from the marketplace, then again at that point, he has the concretized identity of asufi. The parents are not believed to say that's our kid. Rava says, and if it's a time of famine, so Rava comes along to say that if it's a time of famine, even if the baby was taken from the shuk, nevertheless what? The parents are still believed to say, that's our kid. That's our case. So we'll say that's the qualification of Rava. Incredible. Amrav Chista. Shlosha ne'eman al-altar. We'll say there are three people who are believed as long as they provide their statement immediately. Who are the three people? Elohein Asufi. Chaya is a midwife, upoteres chavrosel, and someone who exempts her friends. So asufi adam. So we'll say the asufi case. That's what we just said, right? That in a case, a non-famine year, a non-famine time, right? I find a baby abandoned in the marketplace. I pick up the baby. Parents come along and say, "That's our kid. Shalom aleichem, hatzlacha." Right? Good luck. Right? And they leave. They are believed to say that's their kid, solidifying the baby's genealogical fitness. Fine. That's the case I was saying, but only if they come and identify themselves when the baby is still in the marketplace. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up at Mirat Hashem with the next two cases tomorrow. Osai Shkoyach. Incredible Gemara.
How do you know if the child was taking care of? It's not.